right, we are going to take a little detour this morning. David McMillan is having some severe abdominal pain and is at the ER, I believe. He seems to think it might be gallbladder. I don't know why he thinks that, but he's a lot smarter in those things than I am, so I will fill in for him today. And we are going to go to 1 Samuel 25, story of David and Abigail and Nabal. This is, I think, one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. So we'll see what we can learn from it. Before we get started, let's pray together. Father, we're grateful that we can be here today. It has been quite an eventful week weather-wise, and we once again have seen your majesty and beauty in the snow and the things that you do. And Father, thank you for those reminders of just how awesome and great and beyond our imagination you are. But Father, thank you that we can be here this morning in a nice, secure, warm place, and that we can come together to express our gratitude and thanks and admiration to you, and to learn from what you have taught us in your word. And Father, help us to realize what a great privilege that is, and how blessed we are to have these opportunities and the comfort that we are able to do this in. So Father, help us this morning as we study to learn more about you and more about ourselves and more about who we should be. And Father, help us that each day we would grow to be more like Christ, and that as we do that, we could be a brighter light and greater blessing to those around us. Be with us in all that we do this morning. In Christ we pray. Amen. All right, 1 Samuel 25. We're just going to kind of go through the story, and then I'll ask some questions along the way that I hope you will respond to at least a little bit. If you're not familiar with this story, this part of the Old Testament, if you kind of start back with David slaying Goliath, which just nearly everybody's familiar with, from that point on, it becomes clear that David is the guy who is going to take Saul's place, and Saul, who is king at the time, realizes that. He becomes jealous of that, and even though he knows that God is behind David becoming the new king at some point, Saul's just not real excited about that, as it's hard for us to give up our places sometimes. And so Saul, through a long series of events, tries to kill David in various ways, even when David is playing his harp and singing songs and comforting. Eventually it gets to the point where David just has to kind of run for his life. And so that's where we are at this point in 1 Samuel. He is out kind of in the wilderness. He's actually had opportunities to kill Saul very easily on a couple of occasions, but he has not done that. His soldiers have kind of said, hey, God has given him into your hands. Kill him and be done with this, and you can be king, and we don't have to run around mountains and deserts and all that. And David says, no, that's not my place. That's God's place. When God's ready for me to be king, I'll be king. And so he continues to be out there in the wilderness, and Saul continues to chase him. And then we have kind of a little side story here in 1 Samuel 25. It's interesting. It starts out in verse 1. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. And I don't know why that's there exactly, other than I guess just kind of historical context. Found it interesting. They buried him at his house in Ramah. So I guess there's a family cemetery or something there. But then in the rest of verse 1 there. David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. And hopefully we realize, but that doesn't mean he was making Carmel. Interesting, I just realized this morning. Mount Carmel is up on this little hump on the Mediterranean coast. This is not Mount Carmel, or I would have thought the city of Carmel ought to be at the base of Mount Carmel, right? It's not. It's down kind of across from the Red Sea, south of Jerusalem, if you're familiar. It's in Judah, in the southern part of Israel. And so there's this guy. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and his wife was Abigail. We'll find out that the word name Nabal, or Nabal, however you want to pronounce that, means fool. And that just raises all kinds of questions for me as to, is that a nickname? Is that just kind of what stuck? It's kind of like every time when I was in the office, the caller ID would come up and it would be Herman Platt. And I would think, who is Herman Platt? I have never heard of this guy. Well, it's Herman. Is Butch your middle name? Butch is just nickname. Yeah, but that's Butch Platt. That's not Herman Platt. So maybe Nabal's name was something like that. I have a hard time thinking that his mom and dad named him that. Maybe as he grew up, I don't know. That's worse than a boy named Sue, isn't it? Which I think most of this audience would be familiar with. No offense to any of you. So anyway, we've got Nabal and Abigail, verse 3 in the middle there. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. And I think what that says is he shouldn't have been badly behaved. If he's a descendant of Caleb, I mean, that's a pretty noble heritage, with Joshua and Caleb being the only two guys that did the right thing back when they were in the wilderness. Despite that, he's a sorry guy. Verse 4, so David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name, and thus shall you greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. And so he tells the young men, go up there and just kind of be as polite and respectful as you can. God bless you and your family and everything. Just greet him really, really respectfully. And then verse 7, they are to say, I hear that you have shearers, which basically means it's the time of shearing the sheep, as it said earlier. When I was a kid, I remember the song, well, I thought it was Bringing in the Sheep. Bringing in the sheep, bringing in the sheep, we will come rejoicing, bringing in the sheep, because I didn't know what a sheave was. And so I thought, okay, bringing in the sheep, everybody's happy. Well, that is what's happening here. They're bringing in the sheep to shear them. It's the time of harvest for a sheep herder. And so there's a time of festivity and rejoicing and, banquet and all that kind of stuff. And so David hears that that's going on, and he sends this message by these young men. And he says, I hear you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm. And they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. So David's men are in the same region as Nabal's shepherds. And you think about that. We'll find out there's 600 men with David. And they're living off the land. And so, you would think there's got to be a temptation for them when they get hungry to think, boy, there's a bunch of sheep, let's go take a few. But they don't. They are very respectful. They are even protective. A little later, it'll tell us of Nabal's shepherds treated them very kindly and actually were a benefit to them rather than a detriment as they could have been. And verse 8, the young men of David say, ask your young men, Nabal, and they'll tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. And so just very respectful, time of feasting, there's going to be lots of food there. And he says, we were kind to your shepherds, kind of looked out after them. We didn't steal anything from them. If you don't believe that, go talk to them. Hey, would you share some of your bounty with us? And, we're hungry out here in the wilderness. Very kind, respectful message. And so, verse 9, when David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And so I don't know if that means they actually spoke to a messenger who took that message to Nabal and then it came back with a response, or maybe they spoke directly to him and he's just sitting there kind of pondering what his response is going to be. But in verse 10, we get his response. And Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse?" And he's not asking who he is. He's just saying, who is he to ask me for this? I mean, he knows who he is. I've got to believe that while David and his 600 guys are out there with Nabal's shepherds, somewhere along the line, word got back to Nabal, hey, David's guys are in our area. Is he causing any trouble? Is he taking sheep? No, they're great. They're doing fine. He knows his dad's name. So he's not asking for information here. And in fact, he really is mocking him as it goes along. But so who's David that I should give him anything? Well, he's the guy who slayed Goliath. He's the guy who's conquered Philistines. He's the guy who's going to be the next king of Israel. Not a good question to ask. But then he says, there are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. And so he basically just kind of accused him of it being a runaway slave. Not so much in the context of how we would see that in the history of the United States, but he's a guy who is supposed to be serving the king, and rather than doing that, he's derelict in his duty and he's run away, and he's kind of a vagabond out here, and really belittles David and speaks in a very derogatory way of him. So in verse 11, shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men, so not just David, but to his whole group, give it to men who have come from, I don't know where. And again, he knows exactly where they've come from. He knows what's going on. But he just, in the most disrespectful way, says, a bunch of vagabonds. Just a bunch of guys wandering around the wilderness. Who's David? He's just, running away from his obligations. And so in verse 12, David's young men turned away and came back and told him all of this. And I just wonder what that scene was like when those young men come back. Was anybody excited to bring that message to David? Maybe they were, because they were hostile about it, but I kind of picture them, okay, you go tell him. No, I'm not telling him. You tell him. No, you tell him. It's not going to go well. But they come and tell him. And so, I just read up here. Justin can keep up with this better than me. In verse 13, David said to his men, every man strap on his sword. and every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword. About 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with they call it baggage, the stuff. So there's 600 of them, 400, and David doesn't just say, you guys go get him. He says, I'm coming too. I mean, he is hot, they are putting on their weapons, and they are heading to make things right. Let me go ahead and go through the story, then we're going to come back and ask some questions. So, cameras on David and his guys. You see them putting on their swords and their whatever armor or whatever they have, and now the camera turns back to Nabal's camp. In verse 14, one of Nabal's young men, and you can see him, he's there listening when Nabal is saying these really insulting things to David's young men to take back to David, and I just picture him kind of cringing and thinking, oh, no, don't say that. No, don't. You know, he is wise enough to know this isn't going to work out well for us. And so this one guy goes to Nabal's wife, and he says, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. And just go ahead, Justin. So he just railed at them. What does that mean, railed? It's not a word we use a whole lot, is it?
The Americans say
scorned. Scorned, okay? Yeah. However you want to define it, there's nothing positive about it. So this young man goes and tells Abigail, and he says, Nabal, he scorned them, railed at them, spoke really badly to them, but the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields as long as we went with them. So it's like the shepherds realize, hey, these guys are good guys. We're going to stick close to them. And if anybody comes and attacks us, we've got somebody here to help us. So it's not just that they are there not being aggressive towards them, not taking their sheep. They're actually helping them out. They were a wall to us, both by night and day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. And verse 17. Now, therefore, know this and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house. They could read the writing on the wall. They could see the expression of David's 10 men and know, okay, they're not done with us. For harm is determined against our master and against all his house, and he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him. So he realizes he can't go to say anything to Nabal. He goes to Nabal's wife, Abigail. Verse 18, then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. So she is just loading up with all kinds of food to take these guys. She said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I come after you. But she didn't tell Nabal, because that obviously wasn't going to help things. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. And let's go on. Now David had said, surely in vain, camera swings back to David, have I guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. Seems to really make a point of, we didn't take anything. We helped him out. God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him. He said, we're going to kill them all. David is incensed by this affront to him and to his men. So verse 23, when Abigail saw David, now the two scenes are coming together into one. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt." What does she have going for her? A couple things. What? She's a pretty lady. That may be right, it may not be right, but there is power in that. I mean, here comes this beautiful woman. David is angry, and immediately I'm sure that catches his attention. She's also discerning. She's also a very wise woman. And she obviously is very humble. She says, let the blame be on me. Punish me for it. On me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Would you stop just for a minute? Please let me talk to you. And because of her humility, because of her respect, and as a man, I'm sure because of her beauty, David stops and says, "Okay, I'll take a few minutes before I go and kill all these guys." So then she says to David, "Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly or fool is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent." So I wasn't there, I didn't hear. If I was, I would have stepped in and said something. Verse 26, "Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal." So she says, God has obviously been with you. I mean, you've been running from Saul. You have been delivered. God has taken care of you. May He continue to do that, and may He be your protector and guide and all of that. Verse 27, "And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant." Who's she asking for forgiveness for? Look at verse 27. "The present that your servant has brought, please forgive the trespass of your servant." Yeah, for herself. It's kind of like she's saying, I'm sorry, I should have been there. I didn't hear. He's my husband. I'm not sure what all she's saying there, but she is such a wise and discerning, yes, but a humble woman to say, whatever fault I've gotten this, forgive me of that. "For the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house." She knows he's going to be the next king. God is with him. "Because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live." Is that true? Will evil be found in David as long as he lives? There's going to be some problems along the way. But she is recognizing who he is. Buttering up is not the term, I don't think here. But she acknowledges this is a man who is serving the Lord, who is fighting the Lord's battles, wants to do right. God would say he's a man after his own heart. And she says, I know who you are. I know that you are serving God. I know that you intend to do good. Let's think about what you're doing here. Maybe this isn't part of what you really want to do. And so it goes on in verse 29. "If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God." God's going to protect you. "And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling." Familiar language to David. "And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel. Verse 31, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. She basically says, you know God's with you. I know God's with you. God is going to establish you as king. Don't do something you're going to regret later. Yes, you have the power to do it, but think, is this really what God would have you do? And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. And David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. In that short little moment of her coming, of her bowing down, of her saying, would you listen to me just for a little bit? He hears wisdom and changes his mind and turns back and doesn't go and kill Nabal and all his guys. So here are the questions I want to ask. There's a book that I've been reading called Unoffendable. Brian had mentioned it in one of his lessons, and I found it really challenging. And as I came to this story, I thought there's a lot of dovetailing, crossing over here. Why was Nabal offended by David's men coming and asking to share, considering all that they had done for his shepherds? What's his problem, other than he's a fool? What's that? Okay. Yeah, he did know who they were, but didn't enough to care. Yeah, that could be part.
I would say a combination of greed and pride.
Okay. Yeah, it's my stuff for my guys. And who are you to ask me of my stuff? Now, he obviously didn't mind David's men protecting his shepherds, which I presume, in my mind, if you've got somebody protecting your shepherds, that probably means you get more sheep out of the year of wandering around, giving them pasture and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's mine. And who are you to ask me for that? Greed. Yeah, it's about him. Should he have been offended by that request? The whole story seems to say no. Again, 3 or 4 times, yeah, they were a wall to us. As long as we were with them, we were safe. Just go ask the guys, they'll tell you. We're there helping you. He had no reason to be offended if he had kind of stopped and thought it through. But because he's just thinking of himself and his stuff, and he wants to be the one in control and whatever, then he gets upset by that. Why was David offended at the response? Okay, yeah, I've done something good for you. You owe me something in return. What's at the root of that?
Return evil for good.
Yeah, Nabal returned evil for good. Yeah, but why was that offensive? Why'd that upset David? Had Nabal done anything bad to David? He insulted him, obviously. Is it at the heart of that? Is that pride on David's part? How dare he speak to me that way? After all I've done for him and helped him out? Yeah, he's returning evil for my good. But I think at the heart of that really is pride. I'm a good man. He should treat me like a good man. I deserve better than that. And I think,
Isn't that the temptation for all Christians, though?
yeah,
I mean, shouldn't we be treated better because we're Christians? Shouldn't it be easier because we do good?
absolutely. Yeah, we have an expectation, if I do what's right, something good happens from that. And that's a ludicrous expectation, isn't it? Because the one who did more right and good than anyone, he's hanging on a cross, right? So obviously that's not the way it always works out, but still we have that idea. If I treat Jet well and I'm kind to him, he ought to be kind to me in return. And if I don't know what I could do for Jet, pull his truck out of the mud, but he's smarter than to get his truck stuck in the mud like I might. Then I would expect if I'm stuck in the mud somewhere and Jet goes by, he wouldn't just say, "Oh, sorry about that." It's just there's that thing in us, and that is in a way reasonable to expect. And yet, if we don't get that, it hurts our feelings, which I think for me means it hurts my pride. I want better than that. Was David's anger reasonable? I probably need to put reasonable in quotes. My wife doesn't like air quotes, so I try not to do that. I don't know why. What's wrong with air quotes, Reagan? Was his response reasonable to get angry? Maybe not to kill everybody, but yeah. I think if we went out on the street and told somebody that story, yeah, I'd be mad too. Yeah.
Don't you think it embarrassed David?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, here his 10 guys come back and say, here's what he said. Are they standing there with their look in their eye of, what are you going to do about that? But again, embarrassed. What's at the heart of being embarrassed? It's pride, isn't it? I've got my pair of dress shoes here. I don't like to shop for shoes or anything. And so I use Amazon a lot, which means you're kind of taking a chance at what you're going to get. And I got one pair of shoes I didn't like, sent them back, ended up with these shoes. You can't see them, but they got way too much toe on them. They're not quite pointy skis, but they're a little long, and I don't wear them real often. So going up steps and things, sometimes I catch that toe and stumble, and it's like, did anybody see me? Because it's embarrassing. It hurts your pride. I can't even walk up steps. And when you're getting to my age and people are starting to see you as getting old, you want to say, no, it's not because I'm old, it's just my shoe. But it's pride. And I think that's kind of at the root of David's response here. Yes, sir.
Just remember, we started out crawling.
It's all just a cycle, yeah. We start out crawling, we're going to end up crawling. Yes, ma'am.
Did Nabal know that he was going to be king, that David was supposed to be king?
Yeah, did Nabal know he was going to be king? I think so, or at least he knew he'd killed Goliath. I mean, everybody knew that. And then from that battle, David goes on to be kind of in charge of Saul's armies. And so there's other stories of attacking the Philistines and all that. I don't know if Nabal necessarily knew he was going to be king, but he knew him to be this noble, valiant soldier. And he certainly knew more than he's just some guy out there wandering in the wilderness.
David does know he's going to be king?
Yeah. And Saul does, and that's why Saul is chasing him around.
So David had a point to make in the beginning for people to listen to him.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, again, is it reasonable? Well, from the world's view, yeah, I'm going to be king. I'm not there yet, but I know I'm going to be king, And what kind of challenges does that put in me to remain humble? And to not think, okay, everybody ought to bow down to me. Even though Saul obviously is not bowing down to him. And most of the time he does really well. I mean, like I say, there was an occasion, 2 occasions, where David just very, very easily could have killed Saul. And he didn't. And his soldiers and anybody else would have said, you've got every right to. He's trying to kill you. He's chasing you all around the wilderness. God has given you this opportunity. Take vengeance and put a stop to it. So overall, David is this man after God's own heart. But here, it seems to me his pride does get in the way. He takes offense, which we can understand, but he certainly takes that way too far.
But he does humble himself enough to listen.
Yes, yeah, he's heading on the wrong path, but thanks to the intervention of Abigail and enough humility that he has, he's able to stop for a moment and think, oh, this lady may be right. Yeah, and that's the key. Are we going to get upset at times? Sure. Do we just proceed, run forward with what we feel at that moment, or can we stop for a moment and say, okay, what should I really do about this? This guy has insulted my pride. Is my pride really that important? In fact, is my pride even something I should have? And so we have to have some mechanism in our mind or people around us to help us to stop and think, should I even be offended at this in the first place? And if so, why am I offended? And how should I react to that? We stop at 45 after, is that right? Okay. So a few more questions here. One, and this is a little far-fetched, but if Jesus was the one who was there instead of David, how would he have handled that? And I'm not sure that's a question that needs a public response. But if you just start thinking about that, yeah, I mean, he probably would have had some verbal response. Maybe. I have a friend whose dad said the only thing worse than a fool is the guy arguing with him. So sometimes maybe no response is the right response. But just to think, if Jesus had been the one who was insulted, who was affronted, another one who was going to be king or who was king, who had every right to retaliate, and you just think through it, and whatever answer you and I come to on that, it's entirely different than strap on your sword and let's go kill him. And Jesus would be one who maybe had the right to have that response. And if Jesus is the one we're following, then what would our response be? And so as I kind of look through this, you've got the response of Nabal the fool. That's not the one I want, especially if I get labeled as a fool for it. You have the response of David, which is essentially a response of pride. And you don't have to go very far in the New Testament. I mean, Matthew 5, you just begin the Beatitudes, and they're about meekness and humility, and you're blessed when people revile you and speak evil of you. To understand that, yeah, David's response wasn't the right one. Or you have the response of Abigail, who is this woman who is wise and discerning. And I think, wise and discerning, that's probably the response that I want to follow. Who basically just says, that's just who he is. Don't worry about him. God will take care of you and God will take care of him. And the rest of the story is exactly that. One of the things in this book that I was reading, and we all know this, but he pointed out there are some things that are only God's. Judging the hearts of men, the motives of men, that's not for us. I can't do that. You can do whatever, and I can look at that and I can say, I know why you did that, and I don't know why you did that. I don't know everything that's going on in your mind. You don't know everything in my mind and what background there is. That's for God. I leave that for Him. The other thing is vengeance. That's God's. And so I don't need to be offended and get angry about things when people don't treat me right or whatever happens in my life that I think that shouldn't have happened. And that person, they've got it out for me or whatever. The guy who cuts me off in traffic, that offends me. Does he even know I was there? He might have, he might not. Did his wife just call him and say, I've fallen and broken my leg, please get home? I have no clue. And yet I take personal offense because he cut me off. The next person he cuts off, I think, oh, that wasn't very good. But me, I get offended and angry about that. That's not my place. That's God's to figure all that out.
Well, there's this saying, like when something happens, somebody might say, oh, just blow that off, dust that off.
Yeah.
But Jesus told us in the Bible, if somebody doesn't receive you, just dust them off.
Yeah, shake the dust off your shoes.
Because he doesn't want us to hold that in our head when we could be thinking of something more positive.
Yeah, don't get angry about it. Don't harbor the anger. Don't be offended. Go on with life. And if we could do that, when that guy cuts me off and I get angry about it and I'm stewing on it all the way home, who is carrying the weight, him or me? It's me, right? If we could learn to just say, God's going to take care of that, not be offended, certainly not react in a negative way, it's better for us as well. I think that's one of the things Jesus means when he talks about coming to give us life and freedom. All right, well, that's Abigail and David. Thank you for your comments, and hopefully David McMillan will be back next week, and if not, we'll have somebody else.